Ladies and gents, boys and girls, thems and theys, I am so excited to have here with me today who I have here with me. You might have seen him on Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow. You might have seen him on Dave's One Night Stand. You might have even seen him on Russell Howard's Good News. I am buzzing to introduce you all to Canada's finest. It's Mr. Craig Campbell! Woo! I am so excited to have you here, but obviously not as excited as you are to be here with me. But Absolutely. You know,
you're on the money there. I'm very excited to be here with you, but I can't top you.
Well, you are only human, so I understand why you're excited, because you know that's obviously. So, have you had a good day today so far, my love?
I have. I'm having my morning coffee. It's a great day so far. Thank you.
Lovely, jubbly. So I have got a few questions here that I would love to ask you, and if you would be so kind to answer them, that would be fantastic.
I'll be as forthcoming as I'm able.
Okay, thank you so much, my love. So, you were notorious and arguably the most popular host of Ed's Night Party in Toronto for 100+ episodes and for nearly a decade. Can you tell me how you think you got the job? And then can you tell me some of the weirder things that took place while you were filming?
I think that I was probably not affiliated with maybe some of the other performers, perhaps, who were in line for it. So I was always in the UK, and I think even at the time I might have been living in Amsterdam, and I hadn't really been in the Canadian scene for years prior to that, just because I remember back in the days when I started in Calgary, for example, in Canada, and I remember when people like warned me off of going to Vancouver to do a gig, like it's the big city over there. Whoa, be careful. And so I realized right away I was just really dealing with sandbox politics on a macro level. And so I just started not playing ball with like whose team I was on in town, which has sort of remained politically for the rest of my life, if I'm honest. Yeah. But I could see that you sort of had to join one or the other team to make a crust or even feed yourself, and I always had my sights set on things like the Edinburgh Festival, and even coming to the UK was spectacular, just like to a place that's so needed comedy. I still remember getting the first bank account. And I just couldn't believe that they were giving it to me. And they waived some of the requirements, in fact, of longevity in the country. And I didn't have to show a number of, proofs, just because they were like totally aware of what a stand-up comedian was. And they asked me what clubs I played, and, they knew the clubs I was talking about. And it was just like, holy, I was very much from a world where if you told a bank that you were a comedian, they I'm sure would get you laughing as hard as I just did thinking about it, because the humor that would burst forth from that moment would have little to do with the veracity of your claim, and just their disbelief that that's even possible, let alone a mythology of what you might be talking about. So that in itself was what I was always aiming towards, and that took me out of somewhat the Canadian place of competition. So when it comes to like hiring a comedian for something that at the time and even afterwards, I think that's probably why that quote says arguably, because it was a very controversial show to begin with. It was very, very smutty. And I was just telling the boys this morning that, through that show, I know the size of Burt Ward's cock, and that's something no man should ever be cursed with. But,
Can you share the details about the size of his cock?
Well, I can show you the damage. Yeah, but the fact that I got to go to TV's Robin of Batman and Robin fame, to his ranch out in the California semi-desert, and get to meet all of his Great Danes, as he ran a Great Dane relief ranch. And so it took me to, and I was just telling the guys as well that I got to go to Luke Skywalker's house, to hang out with Mark Hamill in his house overlooking the sea in Malibu. it was a pretty wicked thing. But I don't think that they could have chosen somebody who was affiliated. So I just kind of like always flew into Toronto and sort of played, my friends' rooms and things like that, and didn't really have like an allegiance, as it were. And I think that made it easier for them to almost not offend other comedians by just like, who's this guy? Like as soon as I got that job, it was like, imagine, coming into a place like, for whatever anybody thinks of its clout, Toronto's by a million miles Canada's biggest megatropolis, and to like drop in as a comic that essentially nobody knew and take over its like flagship alternative comedy show. It was pretty, a pretty outlandish move, to say the least. Who is this arsehole that we've never met?
It couldn't have gone to anyone more deserving. Like, you're obviously very humble. You obviously don't realize how good you actually are.
Possibly, but yeah, I'll take your compliment as the sarcasm I read it as.
Oh, no, while we're talking about how humble you are, I have been doing some researching online, and I don't know if you're aware, but like you don't just make people laugh, you actually have helped people get through really difficult times. So I was doing my research, and people have been going through like really, really, really shit times, and just through laughing at your comedy, they see light at the end of the tunnel. Like, it's so lovely to see such a humble comedian. You don't actually know how funny you are. You are actually so funny, and you're so lovely, and loads of people, you help people as well as just making them laugh, which I absolutely love.
That's a funny angle of therapeutic comedy, and just the therapeutic mindset to begin with, and hoping to contribute some benefit to almost anybody's life if they take the effort to come out and see you. It's just like, I value that. It's a pretty intimate thing, and I also like that it can't be its spontaneity means it can't really be fabricated.
Yeah.
And that makes it a really special quantity as well, just in terms of, you learn a lot about people when you see what they reflexively laugh at. And that's a wonderful insight into, the world around you as well. And I'm now in this place of where I've been able to some degree, at least reverse some of my really, really brutal symptoms. And in fact, tonight I'm playing a room that when I last played, I told the audience that I couldn't ever perform again.
Oh.
And yeah. So I'm coming to, it's a very trippy place for me. In fact, even in terms of helping people, I'm probably off stage since like the nonsense that's taken place in draconian measures that were put upon us, 3 years ago, and continuing in places that I've probably gone more into healing people online in terms of how I've had to intervene in my own health issues.
Yeah.
Just because, like, the last time that I played this room in Bournemouth, I, was like looking up through the crack in the wind in the steering wheel through the windscreen, and just at a terrible angle. I couldn't look up. I couldn't get anything out of an upper cupboard, or sort of lift my head. And I'd never ever had to tell an audience before that I couldn't likely ever perform again. And the whole way back to where I lived north of London, I was like looking at the hospital signs every time I went by. I still remember seeing Basingstoke on the M3 and just thinking I should pull over and go to A&E. And was just was already in like discomfort, but then the actual performance itself. Have you heard of Dr. Show, Sandra, down there where you hail from? Have you heard of Dr. Show?
I haven't heard. No.
I think it's called Dr. Show. I might be getting it wrong, but people would probably be able to find the phenomenon just from like the suggestion of it. It's a commonality that performers of almost every type, singers, dancers, comedians, whatever, can like appear well as soon as the play begins, as soon as the show starts, no matter what sort of hideousness is ailing them. And it's a pretty common thing, I think. And in fact, like, there's some degree, and I found in my own life, particularly with like breaks, bone breaks and whatnot, that I found performing can be a really, really therapeutic thing, just because you tend to overact, particularly as a comedian, you tend to overperform And that can, really stretch out any sort of the bits of you that are tight or, or scarring, for example, or in like fascia, if you've heard that expression before, anything that's like binding you a bit, performing, especially incrementally, like, I've been lucky enough to work a lot. So, if you have like a broken foot and you've got like 40 shows in a row, it's a really good time to get it worked out and, to push it beyond where it might resist, but not so far as to re-injure it or hurt it further, but to rehabilitate it nicely. And as well, like if I can toot a Canadian horn, most people aren't aware of this, but I think it was the University of Ottawa, and fairly recently, I think within probably not more than 20 years for sure, that essentially their studies medically began to substantiate that it was far better, particularly with breaks and sprains and like soft tissue injuries, to keep moving, basically to take a load of painkillers and just try and live your normal life rather than bind any part of you, just because then you need the recovery from the binding process, like if you decide to put on a cast or whatever. So essentially they're saying, like, unless you have a compound fracture, just chew opiates as quickly as you can and continue doing what you do, and that'll be the best recovery program for you. So as a comedian, there could be nothing better, particularly an energetic and physical comedian like I've always enjoyed being. And maybe to some degree that's followed in the footsteps of a Robin Williams or a Jim Carrey perhaps, but I've always thought, like, if I was telling a story at a party or a kitchen or whatever, kitchen party full of buddies, the more dramatic I could be, the more like expressive and over the top I could deliver, I realized was like, one of the most powerful transformations for an audience to interpret what you're doing. Like I could probably be deadpan. In fact, I started deadpan, but like I found that, performing, overperforming almost was more enjoyable. And that led to, like, a lot of people I see, like younger comedians, sometimes you wonder where they're at. And some people, when I think back, aren't even at the stage, or they don't even have to get to the stage, but a stage where I got to, where I realized that I always wanted the microphone in the stand, or I wanted to have like a remote mic, just because I wanted to be able to move around more and jump around more. So that recovery process was something that I could always do, and was normally, progressively beneficial no matter what had happened to you. But for the first time, and again, I'm not like performing as often, so I don't even have that facility as well to use it as a therapy for myself. But for the first time in dealing with systemic arthritis and having the sort of like inoperable issues that I have, and the pain that emanates from them, it's the first time that I've ever, like, including that show I'm talking about in Bournemouth, when I performed, would I realize that I'm exacerbating my issues rather than benefiting them. And that in itself is a very, mentally depressive and debilitating thing for a comedian, to sort of realize you're, being further painted into a corner of ability, and so that was really emotional for me and difficult. And it was also made difficult again because I have no trouble performing as I can on stage, or even overperforming as mentioned. But I also know that activity, just because of the lack of flexibility within myself, particularly the confluence of bones and nerves, rather than having like what I thought prior to that, in fact, and after that. In fact, I wasn't even diagnosed. Of course, I didn't exactly know what was going on when I was on stage there. I just knew I was in agony, and then more agony on the way home than I was on the way there. So that again undermined any sense of like, oh my goodness, like, and even to the fact that I actually told that audience that I didn't think I could ever perform again. And in, somewhat of tears. It was very hard to not be emotional. And it was also made frustrating as well, because I think I even asked them, but I knew that they wouldn't have ever known. There wouldn't have been one person that you asked in that audience that, whether or not I was in pain or in any, discomfort, or, so there's that sort of paradox to it as well, that I could pretend to be okay, probably even the next night, but after that, I suffer so badly for it. So so the fact that I've, like, to a degree, I have to say that, Sandra, I'm like I'm somewhat of a minor miracle. I'm like,
yes.
degree transformed into, a metamorphosis. And not to say that I haven't had a premonition of a phoenix in my life several times since this, has taken place, just because that's really been the actual story of my progression. Just because, if you don't know, some of your listeners might know, or you may be aware, that when you first start to like hit arthritis, you're told in no uncertain terms, and I don't say this as a setup to go on an anti-allopathy tirade, but if you're within the mainstream system, all that you hear about arthritis is it's a debilitating, progressive, incurable bone disease.
Yeah.
That's all. It's not going to get a little bit better next week. It's not going to get a little bit better next year. It's always going to get worse. It's going to be progressive. We don't really know much about it. There's nothing that can change it. And you're going to be on progressive painkillers to a higher and higher degree. And that's basically what you're looking forward to, essentially, kidney or liver failure, or a greater systemic, more than anything for me, debilitating headspace. Being on really heavy painkillers is not a fun place, especially, hey, ironically, of course, for a comedian to be, Sandra. like trying to be a professional funny person in a world of misery and despair and essentially like just constant chronic pain, is, especially when you're told that's all you have for your future, is a pretty heavy thing. So that Bournemouth show was the first time that I just had to tell them outright, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I didn't regret saying that, I can tell you for free as well, Sandra, because like all the way home, I, as mentioned, thought I was going to have to go to the hospital. I couldn't believe I got home, just because I was in screaming, shrieking, hot knife pain in the middle of the back, in the like a knife in the back feeling. And to be able to now tonight to be going there to do another show is just nuts. It's nuts. Like I feel like it's out of body. Interrupt you. Sorry.
So what's the name of the venue tonight in Bournemouth? Can you tell me the name of that?
I think it's called the Pavilion. I think it's the Pavilion in Bournemouth. I think it's part of the BIC building, which I've been very familiar with in playing wonderfully with Frankie Boyle when we would come through town. So I'm used to playing that huge room in the same building.
Wow.
Playing the offshoot, which as well wasn't abnormal during that period as well, because I was only ever opening for Frankie, it always gave me a chance to go anywhere else in town to close the local room, which, including places like Bournemouth, wouldn't be uncommon to be in the same building that you've just opened, in the 3,000 or 3,500 seater, whatever the BIC is, to then go down and like just do a little turn in the Pavilion. So that's kind of a familiar territory for me, and I'm actually really glad, again, if I can toot my own horn, that I didn't just recede into the thought that I was only ever going to be a big room act, because I wanted to keep my chops in the smaller rooms and always did. And like you mentioned earlier on, there's just nothing like it. There's just nothing more fun than being in a comedy setting and getting the energy off an audience, and you just you don't get that as much in a huge room. In fact, I'm going to give you just one of the craziest fringe insights I've ever had in my life. Just happened to be on the side of it, and I can't even remember exactly where. May have been in the Alps. It might have been like at one of the altitude festivals, but maybe not. Regardless, I was privy to, and like right next to, I remember I was sitting and I think they were standing. Maybe my arthritis was already playing up back then. I don't recall, but I got to be on the fringes of a conversation where John Bishop was talking to Jimmy Carr about the adjustment of playing only the cameras in huge arena tours where the audience was like 20, 30 feet away from them as the front row. And then maybe, the end of the front row would probably be 80 feet, 60, 80 feet away from the act. And they were watching the screen behind Jimmy and John rather than watching the little pinprick that they were, even though they had front row seats. so John and Jimmy were just discussing the dynamics of like, essentially it was like they were just doing a live TV show. Every show they performed in these massive, arenas was just like filming a DVD rather than performing in a live setting, which gives you an idea of how much I like it, still enjoy keeping attached to a world where like my dream gig, and I think I mentioned it to maybe the last time we spoke about a room in Greenwich called Up the Creek, and I used to call that quite a famous room, and I used to consider it what I'd think of as like hot skittle comedy, where like when you tell the joke, there's just no delay, and when the crowd's hot, like 200-300 people just just right, it's like a real like immediate response. You're on the snare, and they're just ta-ta, ta-ta, like the frequency and energy of that just is unsurpassed, and I think that's something that I hope that that's what comedians really long for, or even want to get in the business to do, just because it's the most energetic of those experiences. And through that successive tours with Frankie, I got to be experience things like Jimmy and John were talking about, so I could relate to it, but it wasn't in a celebratory fashion from my point of view. It was just like just remembering the first time that that I realized the delay in the mic made it feel like a heckler was heckling me, but it was just that like it was my own voice 3 seconds, 5 seconds later that was utterly mad. And I just kept thinking, who's this heckler with the best timing ever? This guy's awesome. Like every time I stop talking, he's got some little, chop at my heels, just, So anyway, and that's why I don't shop at Aldi anymore, and then I wait 3 seconds and, like, that's why I wouldn't talk around. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Who's this prick that's repeating my act back to me? And then the next stage of like figuring the puzzle out and realizing, oh, whoa, that's my own voice. Wow. Yeah. And then having a little marvel at that phenomenon taking place. And that's what I've always enjoyed as well, the mind of a comedian. That maybe that's why they hired me as well for that TV show, because you've got to like, while you're telling your joke, you've also got like a good number of other things that you're spinning in your mind that are necessary. And particularly as a compere, for example, where you got to remember people's names and how much time they're doing and how much time you're on stage, and how much where the next show is going to be and all that stuff. I've always enjoyed that because it's like a memory game for me when I'm on like successive tours, in a room every night. You can talk about the last shows you've been at, and you can talk about the journey on the way, and it's fun to remember, sort of a map in your mind, and it helps your memory just in general with your other jokes as well. So I've always liked the process as well. One of my favorite things about comedy is how good it is for your memory,
Yeah. But we've just briefly touched up on hecklers. Could I ask you, have you ever had a situation with a heckler where you were being heckled and you've had to shut them down? I love seeing comedians shut hecklers down. It really makes me happy inside.
My favorite one that I can remember is is so long ago. Well, let me think. There's a few that, yeah, they're just so, it happens so often. But the real, like the ones that I most remember and celebrate are one that happened the first time that I ever worked in Essex, I believe, and that always had like a bit of cachet to it, as a comedian, a foreign comedian going to Essex, as far as like how Larry was famous for being, would be like an English comedian playing Belfast for the first time. It just has that weight on it. And I was out in Romford for my sins and shames, and there was a guy who was somewhat dominating the other acts that had been on prior to myself, and was clearly the character of the room. I would have called him the Grand Poobah. And I came on stage, and I'd never had anybody adversely respond to what essentially probably is still my opening lines today. Just hey, I'm from Canada. I'd first of all just say I'm from Canada, and then I can play off that in a dozen different ways as far as where I think their minds might go. You know, hey, you want to buy a kayak? You know, you can almost say anything after that, and you're going to get like some degree of a pejorative stereotype response, you know. And I'm a gay lumberjack, you know. There's just like nothing you can't say that, you know, but a number of offshoots of that would normally transpire. But instead, I was interrupted by this guy in the room who, of course, was bothering the other acts. And he right away, you know, and maybe I felt like the energy was going to, you know, instinctively, you just feel the tension in any room. Maybe I already felt like he was going to attack. But I said, hey, I'm from Canada. And over top of everybody else's, you know, non-response, understandably, because no joke has taken place yet, which reminds me of one of my very favorite Russian proverbs that only a fool laughs when nothing funny has happened. And you know, if you've ever like, and I'm sure you have, when you meet people that just laugh when nothing funny is going on, it's like, oh, you're fucking nuts. I see what's going on here. We can all see that nothing funny's taking place, and you're having a good old howl. So yeah, you know, in that kind of way, this guy was overstepping the boundaries already, but he just he gave it one of those a real harumph, I would say. And I was just like, what? What problem do you have with Canada? At that point, you know, Sandra, I was incredulous. Nobody has problems with Canadians. At you know, worst, we have what I think the English are best at, not hatred, because a lot of people can mistake a great English trait for hatred. English people rarely hate. I don't think they'd ever give consideration to hate. English people are experts at indifference. Yes. English people in the main, no matter what you hope or think or dream that they might give a toss about, they in the main can't be drawn to be emotional about almost anything, especially outside of their own wheelhouse or personal interest. You know, being a tough audience is somewhat of a mainstay of almost the entire British diaspora. You know, I don't think there's not between the Welsh, Irish, Scottish, or English a known cheap laugh, you know, nation. I don't think. Where, you know, the English are among the Brits the harder to make laugh. I think there's a lot of, you know, arms folded when any comedian comes on stage is the original response, and then that changes, of course, if they're greeting a celebrity, then they can, you know, just stop clapping, you pricks. You know, you've seen them on TV. Calm down. You know. You've only got 3 channels on your damn TV. It's not a celebrity just because you know him, you know. Like there's always that North American kind of, you know, setting. But regardless, this guy had, for no good reason that I could tell, an adverse reaction to the fact that I was declaring myself Canadian. It could have been the setup for a damn joke, Sandra, for crying out loud. But regardless, I say, you know, I'm Canadian, and he's like, and I'm like, what possible problem could you have with someone being from Canada? You know, like just thinking. Like one of the reasons I left, Sandra, is because the place is that boring. You know, it's like I used to do jokes about that. One of the most, I don't think, in fact, well, I'm very sure, this is an affectation of an old joke. This is not my joke originally, but it's a well-known and the best way to describe Canada joke. And it's, how do you get 100 Canadians out of a swimming pool? Will you please get out of the swimming pool? You know, and that's like, I'd hybridize that into how do you get, you know, 100 Brits out of a swimming pool? You better have a toaster. You know, it's always like Brits that just have that, like, you know, a natural affinity to defy and to be anti-authoritarian, and, you know, just that that's always been, that's probably the saving grace and will be forever of the British Empire, that there's always enough Brits that are just sticks in the mud against the norm and the natural paradigm. And even the fact that, like, on a good night out, every good night out, you know, has a bit of trouble.
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah, so that's almost like a, you know, a British affectation as well, that there's that, you know, wasn't it fun that time that somebody tore the toilet off you know, and there was that fire alarm, you know. It's just like, you know, that's kind of part of the British impression of fun night, you know. So I quite like that, but at the same time, you know, Canadians just just don't have that sort of, there's no rebellious streak, it just, in fact, that's why probably the world and Canadians themselves reacted so incredulously to the trucker convoy protest that took place, just because, most people aren't aware of the undercurrent of rebellion behavior in Canada. But aside from all of that, there I am in Romford, and this guy clearly had a problem with Canadians. I thought, were you touched at a wedding? In my head, I just thought, why is this guy not like Canadians? What have we done? And so I of course challenged him on it. I think that's always best, Sandra. Like, I don't have any stock put downs. I've never liked to be a stock put down person. I'd rather sort of play out the scenario to find out how you can personally hurt their feelings. You really want to get psychologically cruel, if for lack of a better word. And so I questioned him on why he didn't like Canadians, and he seemed, I think, he was a master performer as well, because I think he played a good job of not really having an answer right away as well. So I think he was playing along. Oh, we'll all sort of have a go at at bants, as they say over here. The bants. Let's let the bants unfold. The nascent bants, I would say. I don't think banter was even used as part of a zeitgeist in the way that, like, Essex is pretty much the home of bants, I would say, if there's any. I know that every other region took it with aplomb and made it their own, but I feel like Essex might be, it would be worth looking that up to see sociologically if banter itself was really proliferated out of Essex. But regardless, he thought, I'll play along, and he seemed to kind of think on the spot, but he said, well, this is my best Essex impression. Well, for well, of course, for any foreign viewers. Well, well, for a start. So he gave me one of the for a start. And now I'm thinking, like, Jesus, there's more than one reason why you don't like Canadians or anybody that said they're from Canada. So here we go, right? Like, get ready for the litany of issues this dude has with Canadians. And he said, for a start, you don't speak proper. And I took that and just let the hang time, well enough hold the room in suspense. And that's, to me, I think, is the real magic of working a live room. And right when I thought the timing was right, Sandra, I said, Lee, we don't speak proper Lee. And that, of course, had just for me, the perfect gestation of the audience being stunned enough by that execution that a slow and then developing and then manifesting into a much stronger, louder applause break happened. And I was just like, yeah.
I hope he felt that small afterwards.
I hope so. Well, he shut up for the majority of the rest of my set, to my recollection. So as far as I'm concerned, that's job done. And that's the challenge. And there's that sense of like one-upping, but I think there's also, like, in a professional comedian sense, you have to kind of one-up them and then show them why you're the professional comedian, right? It has to be that little increment higher. It has to, if it's a one-up, the comedian should take it to that, like, third level and tap them on the head a little bit, just like, okay, thank you. I'm being quite arrogant there, because also, I've learned over the years and have always appreciated as well, because I'm usually playing somewhere, or at least in my younger years. And if you ask, like, when I was doing Ed's Night Party, that was like sort of the verge of my professional career, really, the first time that I could really say I was, making serious dough and doing it for a living, for example. But prior to that, it was like a real commonality in my life, and something I still really enjoy doing, of just being, like, pretty much the only guy doing a really remote show in, like, a log bar that's got 25 snowmobiles parked in front of it, and the rest are pickup trucks. And it's like, you're the act and you're the evening, and microphone, holding a microphone with a flashlight, so you've got light on your face, Sandra.
Right.
Real, like, breaking down barriers, as far as, like, we don't get a lot of comedians around here, and and that being, the atmosphere that you work in, I very, very early on, I still subscribe to the idea that everybody's got a bit of funny in them, for sure. We all know, not just ourselves. A lot of audience members will be funny, but a lot of them will definitely have a very funny uncle or very, funny aunt. Or I was talking about this the other day with another comedian, and we were just thinking, yeah, it's just like somebody who's hilarious but doesn't need validation from strangers to confirm it. Just got lots of like class clowns who are the star of their family. So needless to say, when I've performed, I've always very much like not ruled out that the person who's heckling might actually be pretty good at it, like, and also for me, that's like free laughs as well. I've always felt that way, that like I want nothing more than like, I don't care. I'm not precious about why the audience is laughing at all. I have absolutely zero ego about possessing the purpose, the reason behind their laugh. I'm more than happy to know that they're just laughing. That's like,
Yeah.
I've been taught that from an early age, from like comedians who gave me great advice starting out, of like, that itself, don't worry about why they're laughing. And then the bigger one almost is don't interrupt. And I see, actually, not that, nobody needs to hear my ideas or rules or thoughts on it, but if, for food for thought, if you consider it, I think it's good advice. And I've told many young comedians to do so, that if they're laughing, just let them laugh. Don't interrupt. People start going in fits of laughter. Just give them space. It's a lot of times comedians are afraid to just stop telling jokes, be quiet. You can get so much out of your facial expressions as well. Another great thing in small rooms, not that, some big rooms don't have the cameras and the projectors, but being able to, just work in silence is a fun thing to be able to do. And of course, the best time to do it is when they're just giggling and laughing, and just let them go. Let them go. That's what you're there for. It's crazy to think that you drive through the night to get to a place like Bournemouth and then interrupt an audience when they're laughing. Right? Just like it's totally working against logic. It's just like, hey, you got him laughing. Stop. Let him go.
Yeah.
It's a real fun thing to work with. And once you sort of get into the sort of theme of that, performance wise, it's a great way to relax. And I love that. Yeah, it's a fun thing. I'm a very natural performer, so I like the idea of nerves or any of that kind of silliness just isn't like there. So I really enjoy it. I just love it. I love it. And that's why I cried when I told them last time that I wouldn't be back.
Yeah.
So tonight's going to be something else, Sandra. Woo!
Oh, I'm so excited for you. Obviously you've got a strong Canadian accent, which I can hear, but every now and then I'm detecting a little bit of an Irish accent coming through as well.
How funny. Yeah, we get told that very often, and there's a few things regarding that, actually. There's the if there's anything, it's probably a Scottish lilt, more so than likely Irish, just because of my familial ties, and my propensity of doing shows in Scotland is probably more than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm around the Scots a lot. And of course I have a curiosity about my own background, but I have almost zero, although I've spent quite a bit of time there, relations at all with Ireland. And it's a very, for me, logically difficult country to relate to, just because I try not to, because it would be a sort of philosophy of performing that I wouldn't like to support, almost, just from like a personal point of view.
Yeah.
But that I find the Irish challenging, because I don't want to just pretend, because they're foreign to me and they have foreign accents and they're Celts or Celts, or they're related, ethnically to the Scots, that they have all of these, attributes that the bagpipes, the kilts, the celebration that just passed of Halloween, all of these similarities, but they're not the same people, and like comedically, you can, quite quickly use the wrong references. I still remember when I told them on stage at the Olympia Theatre in Dublin. Oh, Sandra, oh boy! And the show, I can assure you, wasn't going well before this. It was like it was deep water. I was struggling through the snow, and in desperation, I just like said, "Hey, you know." I still catch myself on this. Why, we all got the same queen, damn it. Oh my God, I could have like not thrown a grenade at them and got less of a response.
Sound like a lead balloon. I bet that did.
Bang, you know. So that's always been like this sort of my removal from them. That like I wish I knew more about them, and I wish I knew what their funny bone was. And I know certainly, you know, a lot more now than I ever did, just because I have that curiosity about them. But it's something that I for sure wouldn't have, even if you heard it. There's just no Irish at all in my upbringing or experience. But I do tell people that like there are bits of Canada that do have like the lilt in it, particularly Newfoundland, and they speak right just like that there. They got that like the you know, our caps don't have guns by. You know, they've got that bio, they say, and it's a funny, it's probably our most extreme, most hilarious accent in Canada. And it's directly because they're like of Irish, you know, stock. You know, many of them had fled the famines and, you know, had run from Ireland and ended up on a mossy rock in Canada that had only previously been seen by Vikings and made a go of it, you know. So they've got like a really isolated and esoteric accent because of that.
Yeah.
And then below them, there are like Scottish diaspora accents as well. The Nova Scotia, no surprise, New Scotland, of course, has a very Scottish like lilt to it as well. And they, you know, like fiddle faster than Scots in Scotland and do all the Irish, you know, or Scottish story dancing and, you know, the Highland dancing and stuff like that. So there are bits of Canada pockets that keep it alive, but it's always strange for me. I have to say that when somebody like yourself says that, first of all, that, you know, you think I have a strong accent, and second of all, that you can hear a lilt within it, it always strikes me odd just because like, for sure, absolutely. And I can tell this, you know, definitively, anecdotally from my own life, when I would go back to Canada, they think I've got the softest Canadian accent ever, if you can believe that, which is crazy, you know, that like, and they sometimes accuse me as well, just as you have. So you've got certainly good company that I've more than once in Canada had them wonder whether or not I was Irish.
Oh my God! Wow. Yeah.
Scottish, yeah, like outright, like they don't think I'm Canadian anymore, which is so wild. And you know, to hear that you think I've got a strong Canadian accent, and then to go to Canada and have, you know, more than a few people just be like, "Oh, what part of Ireland are you from?" It's like,
Yeah.
what? There's someone at the door here. So give me a second here.
Okay.
I'm all right. How can I help you? All right. Yeah. How can I help? What?
Do we need to stop the interview or anything, or what the fuck are you doing there?
I'll just nip round to see Craig.
There's a shelf here that he's putting up. You said you were going to get milk. You're chilling with Craig Campbell. You knew I wanted to be there.
I've been down the shop.
You know him?
That's my fucking husband. What's he doing at yours?
We've known each other for years. You said you were doing some interview, but I didn't realise it was with Craig.
There's a bloody shelf there that you've been promising to put up.
For you?
Well, that will do. But I prefer for Roche, but that will do. I'm not. I'm pissed off with you.
We'll talk later, darling. Love you.
Bye. I am shocked. That's my husband.
I'm shocked also. I didn't know you knew Gary, and I certainly didn't know that he was married.
Oh, he doesn't like to advertise that. I know. It's almost like he's embarrassed of me. But here
Well,
we
he's
are.
got your nice gift there.
He has, and yeah, I want all three. Don't think you're having one of them eggs, mind, okay? I want all
Can I
three.
have the toys?
And the toys, definitely the toys.
Good. Don't lose either the eggs or the toys.
Sandra, I'm leaving now, but I did say that I was going to see Craig in and around Halloween. and
Yeah.
Halloween
Oh,
on it. So sorry,
I'm more concerned about the shelf. That's all.
it'll be done. It'll be done.
Right.
Have you told
Thank
as,
you.
as Craig mentioned his Halloween story?
Not yet. No, we will
Oh.
get. Yes.
See you later. Bye.
I'm really shocked that you knew my husband. Like, I am really, really shocked.
As shocked as I am?
Oh, don't admit. Judging by your face, you're obviously more shocked. But I just can't believe it. He told me he was going down the shop to get milk.
How long ago was that?
Chill it. It was about 2 hours ago.
Oh,
That's a long fucking milk trip.
I thought it was weeks ago. I'm okay. Okay. Well, I'm not as shocked now then, but I'm still shocked.
So I'm gonna just forget about him for a minute because
Okay.
think about the shelf and I'm gonna think about the dust that is accumulating and I just cannot take that. I just cannot take that stress right now.
Deep breaths.
So I'm gonna ask you one more question and then I would like to ask you about Halloween and then I would like to talk about some more gigs of yours if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
I understand you had a brush with greatness while living in Vancouver in the 90s, but you didn't hear about this until quite some time later. Could you please tell me about that?
Yeah, I think it was I think I was thinking about it the other day. I think it was about a 17-year hang time. And I was talking to a buddy, and we were in a parking lot in our snowboard gear. I don't know if we were thinking of going to get a coffee or talking about what run we'd just done or whatever the hell it was. But we started to talk for whatever reason about a place I used to live in Vancouver at an address at 41st and Victoria, I think it was. Maybe 29th and Victoria. Regardless, my buddy was recalling some event that had taken place. Well, a number, it turns out, of events that had taken place at that address, and just led into the conversation really nonchalantly with, "Oh yeah, that place over on 29th and Victoria, where David Duchovny was fucking your girlfriend."
Oh my God.
I said, what? Just like, oh, what? Can you go back a bit? Can you reel that back a bit? To the what? And then he responded wonderfully, Sandra, with he said, oh, I thought you knew.
Oh my God.
Yeah, totally. And then to put the icing on the cake, followed that up with, I thought everyone knew.
Oh my God.
So I had like the weight of not just like I didn't know, but then the realization that like in my comedy circle that clearly more than he knew, and then it was another even stranger odd sensation that just the distance between like in time of the event and my hearing about it, that changed entirely my emotional response as well. So it was a very odd sensation to just be like kind of like as shocked as anybody would have been, but I certainly wasn't like mad.
Yeah.
I wasn't upset. It was just like there was way too much. I was trying to think, God, what the hell? Damn hell was her name again? Like, which took a lot of the sting out of the spitball, as far as that goes. And but it was just such a classic moment in my life. And then he added to it, yeah, and you're on as well, mine, Sandra, yeah, on your couch.
Oh my God.
So now I could even picture it, I remember even now recalling, the layout of the front room. I know where my mom's father's painting on the wall was, looking down from the little boathouse scene as the star of the X-Files defiled my girlfriend at the time. Yeah, classic. And it's nuts as well. I'm giving dramatic pause here, Sandra. No, still not yet.
She didn't even live there.
Oh my God, what a fucking bitch, right?
I'm gonna bring David Duchovny from the X-Files back to my boyfriend's house and screw him on the couch.
Oh my God.
And tell everybody, or so, everybody's gonna find out, except Craig. Wowee. What a
So
time.
since you found out, have you come face to face with any of those? Because it doesn't look like you're affected by it, which I love.
No.
Have you come face to face with any of those since then?
No, the best that's and now it's like a developing bit for me, because I don't always tell that story to audiences, and I've learned that and I appreciate that you recognize David Duchovny from the X-Files, but most people you might not, maybe you would be, but potentially you'd be surprised to know most people don't know who he is at all, and particularly British audiences. So when I tell them my David Duchovny my girlfriend story, as recently happened in Newcastle, and it wasn't until the drive back, as I was driving along with a couple of comedian buddies, and we were commiserating about the show that I would have to once again argue went about as well as Dublin, I was recalling there, and potentially because of that story. But I was telling the guys in the car that I got about as far, Sandra, as saying, you know what? I don't think that audience knew who David Duchovny was. And I didn't even get like Duchovny pronounced before both of them just like snapped back at me. They didn't. They didn't. For sure. For sure. None of those people in that audience had any idea what you were talking about. They just thought a guy named Dave screwed your ex-girlfriend and you're like, all caught up in it. And so for me, that's even funnier than the original story, that just like there's audiences all across the UK. I guess he doesn't like guys named Dave, just like totally incredulous as to why it would be an interesting story even to tell, let alone a comedic one. So for me, from the point of view of the comedian, that's just that's my great night out, Sandra. Those are the ones that are the most fun for me, because I'm just, well, as I often tell the audiences, I'm having a good time. I can't speak for yous, but you want to join the comedy show? It's a doozy. It's a real doozy. You just got to listen.
So we're running out of time slowly. So I would just like to touch up with you on one of your memorable stories about Halloween. I've been doing my research, and I believe it contains a chainsaw.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and at the time, of course, although I've acted it out in theatrics since, that the chainsaw that I used for the play that I wrote about it, I, of course, for safety reasons, Sandra, always health and safety, mate. You're in the UK, right? Health and safety. Right? I took my. It's always funny when health and safety is coming from somebody that you fully wouldn't be surprised to take a headbutt from.
Yes.
Health and safety, right? And I had to. I don't know that I had to, but I did for safety purposes in a room in Edinburgh at the festival for the show that I did on it. I removed the chainsaw chain from mine, but the original story, which I've been questioned on even recently, of how true is it? It is so unbelievably true. It's terrifyingly true. How nuts I was as a teenager, Sandra, in the sleepy little community of Glamorgan in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I had all my buddies over for my Halloween party, Sandra, and I was already sick of Halloween at 17. I was cynical about it. I didn't care about the proliferation of pushing candy into kids, and I was probably becoming aware of adult onset diabetes. I read a lot, even as a teenager, and I just thought like it was always very American. I was already tortured at that time as a Canadian kid because we would be able to watch. I don't know if you've ever experienced this sort of frustration or if there's an analogy for it in the UK, but we would watch American products on our Canadian televisions, on American TV channels that we couldn't buy in our shops. So half of the Halloween advertising that, of course, became increasingly farther and farther away from Halloween would always promote things that we couldn't even buy in our shops anyway. So it was part torture as well as part holiday. So I was beginning to hate everything except for the terrifying terror element of what Halloween really should be, and that's scaring the bejesus out of your buddies. So when and I think even back at this point, it was pretty cool that, like, my buddies would come over to my house. They brought their girlfriends with them, and I, to some degree, had enough cachet as a friend in their lives that it was a place to circulate, go over to Campbell's house, So I brought him down into our already terrifying basement. The wood paneling on the wall, like some of your viewers might have seen in several American serial killer documentaries. That sort of the type of decor that you would see in a serial killer's lair. And everything but the trap door really would have been perfect for a serial killer documentary. And around everything unfinished, Sandra, everything like you could see the insulation showing, but the drywall hadn't gone up yet. Everything. We downed tools in the middle of a money crisis, as often happened to middle class families that became very much lower class and then very much homeless families. And around the corner was again a spook. Everything was spooky, Sandra. The laundry room had no door on it, but the laundry, was there. The baskets are on the floor. The basket that I still remember my mother the first time, probably maybe 3 years previous to this story. And I advise, if there are any mothers out there, or if you in future or are already yourself the mother of a boy particularly, do not ever ask them, as my mother did, in the confines of that very uncomfortable space to begin with the second toilet of the house lurking in the background, again unfinished. So a skeleton of as you would say 4x2s, and we'd say 2x4 frames. There, you could really, if you got on your tippy toes and peek, you could watch your dad pissing. I can tell you for free, and that's probably substantiated by a true story as well. But regardless, my mother, over top of the washer and dryer set and the basket on the floor, pulled out a pair of my underwear, again at about 14 years of age, Sandra, and asked somewhat incredulously, but seemingly with no clues of her own. And again, I stress, please, mothers out there, never, ever ask your teenage son, a son, can you tell me? She had a bit of a lilt as well, tiny Scottish lilt. She went to school in Greenock, and for a couple of years of her teen years, and she'd always, hold on to the old country, as they called it. Son, can you tell me why there's blood in your underwear? And it's really hard to work up the kind of confidence. Luckily, I'm a comedian, Sandra, because I don't think your average teenager would have had the confidence to to have to look at your mom and have going through your head thinking, I wonder if I should tell her that it's because I'm jerking off so feverishly that I'm causing wound to my cock. And even crazier than that, to think that, like, you would imagine, Sandra, you would think that a wound to your cock would at least slow you down. Of course not. This is an ongoing thing, right? So regardless, we had to leave it at a stalemate. There's really nowhere to go. So all of these memories are taking place as I get my buddies crammed down into the family room of the downstairs area. Again, well paneled. I think we didn't have we didn't have the relationship with Turkey that the Brits have, where there's actually a rug on the floor, or even maybe from Iran, or maybe even from the Middle East somewhere. We're Canadians. The rug on our floor is an offcut of carpet from the upstairs carpet, right? So we've got that. It's fraying at the ends, and but that's the area where the majority of the kids can put their ass, so they don't have it on concrete where it's going to freeze off before the beginning of the film that's now being shown on the 50s era tube television, big wooden number, maybe out of oak. It was pretty amazing. We dragged back from Menlo Park, California, on a trailer on the back of a 76 Wildcat when my auntie died, the Bubs. So we'd gone down to California to get their shit. We dragged it back. So it had like there's no doubt about it that it was spooky as F, I can tell you, Sandra. Like, you know, the basement itself was spooky. The TV we were watching my entertainment for my friends on was spooky. We had, when we went down on that trip to get the effects of Muriel Bub, the only Muriel in a family of Maggies, by the way. I always tell that joke when the Rellies would come to visit from the old country, of course, Sandra, at the dinner table, it was Margaret, 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 Muriel, hi, and Stuart. Oh, your relatives, right? So the Muriel had passed away. We went down to get her gear. And on that trip, and you can look this up or your viewers can, we went to visit, which was in her neighborhood in Menlo Park, California, conveniently, the haunted Toys R Us.
Oh.
As covered by, you know, like America's greatest whatevers, you know, the in celebrated American lore. You know, there's a Toys R Us where every time the employees got there in the morning, long before the days of CCTV, someone had been fucking with their stuff, you know, and then they'd put up, you know, cameras to catch it, and there'd be like the floating beach ball and, you know, just all the kind of crazy stuff. So yeah, totally. So, you know, I wasn't particularly keyed into the paranormal, but like I'm also a child at the time, so it had some effect for sure. And so there I was, you know, watching on the old 50s TV with the old, now at that point it would have been like 70s or, you know, barely into the 80s era VCR, like literally a piece of like Sovietsky memorabilia sitting in like a supercomputer sitting in your house, you know. I'm surprised that the VCR itself didn't crush the TV that it was sitting on as an antique, but maybe because it was oak it didn't. But regardless, I thought, I got my buddies over, I'll play for them. I'll try and scare them. That's all I thought, Sandra. That was my motivation. I thought, like, put on something real scary. And by that time, I'd probably watched maybe the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all the like mainstream greats. The Halloween. I don't know if Halloween, you know, 2 or 3 had come out, but probably Nightmare on Elm Street. Probably Friday the 13th, the big ones that most people, Hellraiser, maybe it might have been too early for that, but like, you know, we've seen some pretty scary mainstream films, and I wanted something a little more bespoke than that, if I can use a very, you know, a term I wouldn't have used in Canada, for example, for my buddies. And so I bothered to go to, in the old days, Sandra, do you remember when you went to a store to get a VHS tape? It's just nuts to think, like, you know, we're talking about Fire Sticks and Netflix and most films, you know, you can see even on YouTube or, you know, some other carrier. It's just ridiculous. Like, I had to leave the house, Sandra. I had to go, like, yeah. I'm going to get a film, everybody. Cover me, you know, like I might be gone for some time, you know, who knows how long that could take. And of course, you know, what you don't have now, or it's harder to find now, is the guy who ran the video shop was an aficionado to some degree, you know, and this guy was pretty goth at the same time. So I thought that he would probably know about horror films, and whether he did or not, he claimed to, and he took me over to the horror film section, if you recall, with the masking tape and the felt pen and stuck on the horror film bit. And he pulled off for me, which I later found out was quite a seminal early, like, as I think they would refer to them, a gore fest. Yeah. And it's famously still today celebrated. It had, I don't remember the director of it, but he had made some decisions that were very last minute within this film, including a kung fu scene, which I believe just in the filming of it, you know, over lunch somewhere, someone at the craft services was talking to his buddy or something on the phone. You know, this actually would have been even long before anybody had a phone on set, but there was a chit chat going on, and somehow the director surreptitiously found out that somebody knew how to kung fu, and then before you knew it, there was a kung fu scene. You know, you're hired. You know, welcome to the production. So I believe somebody who wasn't even an actor then had like a fight scene in the film pieces, to give you some idea of, you know, the sort of experimental air in the production of it. But this guy made it clear to me that it was among horror film aficionados an extremely scary film. So I took it on his good word, and I, put it under my arm and skipped back to my family home. And my buddies showed up, and now we're all down in the spooky basement. And I chucked it in and pressed the button. And I feel I've always had, and probably why I'm still here and would not ever consider moving back, Sandra. I have the cynicism of the Brits. I carry that deep in my soul, and I appreciate it. Whatever you say about Brits' gullibility now, or the propensity of the population to potentially be gullible now, we can parse that one way or the other. But like, Brits have always had a reputation for being a little bit savvy, just a tiny bit, and I always used to say, like, particularly if I'm performing in Ireland, one of my opening lines is, "Oh, it's nice to be here in Ireland. In Canada, our cops are Irish too." So, the fact that there's just that little bit of like, it's a British, thing as well as an Irish thing, that like the cops who aren't Irish in Canada are probably English or Scots, just that, like, and when you think of like the original cops in Canada, the Northwest Mounted Police that evolved in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, like Fort McLeod, Calgary, where I'm from, it's named after Calgary Beach on the Isle of Mull. They're all Scots. Everybody, up until World War II, 30% of Canadians were Scots, and the other 30% were English, or sorry, 40% were English, and the other 30% were French.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. That's like, so like our background, if there's anything that gives Canadians the savvy that we've been, endowed with, it's our origins as being essentially a British colony where like everybody's either Scots or English or Irish or French. And because of the milieu of those people working within each other in a society, against the backdrop of a very, vibrant and strong Native American community that really Americans didn't have, Canada had the secondary social creature of the Métis, who are an entirely, separate ethnicity, being the offspring of like half an Indian, half a Scot, half an Indian, half a French person. The Métis element being, and I say half a Scot because lots of early Scots in Canada were bilingual and fluent in French, right? The Old Alliance, right? So you got that whole thing going on. So, needless to say, Canadians grew up with a real, like, no matter where they were from, they were pretty switched on to being dicked over and dicked around. There's a lot of competition in the ranks between, the people there. So, so I've always thought that like that was a great affectation of just being a bit of a gumshoe, and in a way, I always, in a cod way, describe Americans on stage, Sandra, as Americans can be quite famously a bit, Elmer Fudd, right? That's the reputation, a little tiny bit more gullible. That, or I would always express it as, "That sounds great. I'll take a dozen." It's the what you expect from the Yanks. So I thought that I had that in spades, even as a teenager. And there I was in my parents' basement, and I'm just sitting there watching this film, and I'd been told so much about it. I had such high hopes for it, and I, more than anything, even then I wouldn't realize, but now it seems entirely normal to me, that I was barely watching the film, but I was more watching my friends at profile, right? Like, I was trying to see the reaction. I wanted my buddies to be shit scared, so I was like keeping an eye on them, and I could see how spooky that is, the reflection of the TV on their faces, and I'm just watching, looking for their reactions, and at the same time, out of the corner of my eye, watching a film that I can say, Sandra, the whole time I was just sitting there, I just thought, blood don't look real. Nobody's tried running from that son of a bitch. Just thought nobody was cornered. Would have had to just like climb a fence. The guy's like 70 pounds overweight, carrying a chainsaw. Are they just like scared into like trying to get away? And I just thought, I don't buy it. And actually, to give tribute to the Americans who are switched on, I actually thought for a moment, Sandra, I thought, that dog don't hunt. Like I wasn't going to be scared by it. And I'm just that type of person. Like if I can't escape into it, and it's probably why I don't watch much in the way of films today, just because like if I can't escape into the reality of it, and this is again why I like performing on stage, because I like to bring people to the event. I like them to be like at one with me in the experience that I'm trying to transmit to them. And I was watching that film and I just thought, It's just not scary to me. And maybe it was the contrast between the VCR settings and the old TV, tube TV settings. Maybe that's why the blood looked too yellow to me or orangey hued or whatever. But I just thought, and then much to including this conversation, Sandra, I had the epiphany of my young life up to that point. I just sitting there thinking about how crap that movie was. I just thought, I wonder if I didn't go out to Dad's pickup and get our chainsaw and bring it back down into the basement here and start it up, if this Halloween party wouldn't just get that much more exciting. Sandra, my goodness. Oh my good Lord above. I cannot tell you how much more exciting that party was going to get. I couldn't have in a billion years and 1,000 lives lived in a row had any inkling into how exciting a room full of teenagers was going to become when I came down and blocked the only exit from the room with a chainsaw, an actual chainsaw, while a guy on screen had already buttered them up with 30, 40 minutes of chopping up kids on a college campus with a chainsaw. I don't know in terms of like the layers of psychological abuse that what I'm telling you right now entails. In terms of, potentially I could still have those people working for me in my life as MK Ultra zombified hypnosis victims, because the impact of what took place next, Sandra, was so unbelievably nuts and bananas to even try and describe in your own mind. I thought, first of all, I got to sneak away from here. And this we get now deeply into my overinflated sense of my impact on my social group, Sandra. Because I thought I had to invent a reason to leave the room, right? I had to excuse myself and buy myself a bit of time. And I did so by saying I had to take a piss. So I told them I had to go and take a piss. And then immediately as I was walking up the stairs to go outside to get the chainsaw, I remembered, like after the fact, that we had a basement toilet. And then I just thought, like, now I thought playing in my friend's head is like, what kind of piss does Campbell have to go do? Is he got a special piss? In fact, if I'm honest, I was probably thinking, although they wouldn't have like in a million years assumed so, I was probably worried that they were thinking I was going to fucking jerk off, if I'm honest, like I knew how much I had to jerk off on a nearly hourly basis at that age. So I thought there's probably no reason why they wouldn't know about it. But of course, it's just like that unwritten, information of teen years back in those days. And, none of that stuff was out loud and talked about. So I had that playing in my head. I just thought, oh my God, like they're going to think I'm a weirdo. Why am I going upstairs? But regardless, I had a plan and I had to stick to it. So I walked up the stairs and I got into the kitchen, walked back over top of where they were in the basement. So top floor, doubled back on myself. And I always like to stress this. This is absolutely true, Sandra. I walked out an unlocked front door. Good old Canada. You hear about that, but that's exactly what it was. Like, didn't have a house key, didn't need it. So opened up the screen door, opened up the big storm door, walked outside to an unlocked pickup truck. Nope, didn't have the keys to my dad's truck, just like the canopy at the back of the cab over top of the pickup truck. Entirely unlocked, always was. Got a hold of the unlocked chainsaw. You might think that there's even like a strong box or something that's bolted to the frame of the truck where you might keep your tools in, but no. This is urban Canada in the 80s. In Canada, we just like shit wasn't locked up at all. People like, hey, what if someone stole your saw? It's just like, well, I'd probably notice because it's mine, and they wouldn't because they had a saw too. It'd just be weird. Why would you have two saws? It's just like it wouldn't make any sense. So I went out, through an unlocked door to an unlocked truck, got the unlocked chainsaw. And I wasn't like, it wasn't the first time I'd run a chainsaw before, Sandra. Half of the wood that was behind me at that point that we had for the fireplace that was probably burning while they were watching the film in the room in the basement was chopped by me, bucked up in the woods. So I knew exactly how that chainsaw ran. And I also knew October 31st in Canada, very, very cold still, right? So it was a freezing cold power tool. And I had enough knowledge at that time, 17-year-old kid, to know that a cold chainsaw was not going to start on the first pull, of course. So what did I do at that point? What do you think, Sandra? I had to run down the road and warm it up. Oh, yeah. So now you got a teenage kid running down the road with a chainsaw down to the park. I still remember what tree I decided to hide under, big canopy. I think it was a spruce. And I got underneath it so nobody could see me, or at least they couldn't see me from every angle. And I started cranking and because of course, I didn't want to go down into the basement with a cold saw and just be like, just have to push it towards them and say, oh, it would have been real scary if it was going, huh? So I didn't want to have just an insane failure. Needed it running. And I'm sure at this point, I don't know what the rumor was as far as in my neighborhood, but I'm quite sure that Canada would have been no different to the UK at that time in terms of that's one of the things I first noticed about Brits when I got here is that if there's somebody who regularly comes into their life, we might call them life's extras, somebody who you see a lot, but you don't know, somebody from your village or whatever. I know that people in the UK have a little narrative on the go. They might have a nickname for that person, or, I saw Baldy today, or who knows what it is. But and you can imagine that myself coming to the UK as a long-haired Canadian, the different communities that I've, immersed myself into, I know that there's a reputation that you have, they might know, maybe it's a positive one. Maybe they think you're a funny comedian. Maybe they think you're not, there's all kinds of echelon of how you might be referred to. But I have a feeling in that neighborhood in Glamorgan in Calgary that people probably already thought that I was at least a wild child. And now here I am. And again, I don't know if the neighbors happen to see what the hell is going, what's all that commotion now at this time of night? It's the Campbell King. Himself a chainsaw this time. What's next? Do we call an ambulance or the fire department? Just I can see that I was already being a maniac. So there I was. I heated up that saw. I got it. Still remember getting it good and hot. Got it good and warm. Gave it a couple of minutes of running time. Just kept the revs on it. And I still remember it this time, Sandra. This is a weird element of it as well. I did clock it. I did think, wow, this is a loud saw. And then I remembered that my dad, and this is strange because I didn't really get along with my dad. We were quite adversarial through my entire, I don't think that's abnormal, particularly in teen years. But it's still, when I hearken back to remembering this story, I still think so fondly of him because when I was writing this play to perform in Edinburgh, I called him for information to kind of substantiate, Dad, what kind of saw do we have? And why was it so loud? I actually asked him that. I questioned him on what the hell was our little tiny 14-inch home light saw so loud for? And he described, he explained to me on the phone, again, this is when I lived in the UK, Sandra, he explained to me that he had bothered in my childhood when I didn't have fluff on my nuts. This guy who I didn't really have much respect for, certainly didn't show respect towards, when I didn't know what was going on in the world at all and was entirely dependent upon everybody for my own survival, my dad was in our garage at our Vice, taking apart a chainsaw and porting the manifold on it so that it was able to run at a higher RPM. And I'm talking a higher horsepower more so in terms of and I'm talking on a scale that's so unbelievably minute. It's unbelievable that he would make that much effort. He turned a 1.7 horsepower saw into a 1.8 horsepower saw at the expense of 110 decibels to pull that off. Literally, he made our saw illegal. So because the muffler had been modified and made it that teeny increment more powerful as a saw, it was just it was the most insanely loud power tool that you could ever dream of being near, let alone handling. So I remember under the tree just thinking, holy, this is going to really knock their socks off, right? I was starting to, I was playing the narrative in my mind. And as well, I hope you can appreciate, I also thought, like, I'm not completely insane, because I did actually like have a moment of lucidity under the tree as I was warming up that saw, probably when I was like running it and realized how loud it was. And I thought about the effects that it might have on the kids in the basement. I actually did have a moment of reflection where I thought, whoa, I thought, what if they decide to like try to disarm me? Right? I had that moment of clarity. I thought, holy, like that's a pretty tight space. I thought, what if they tried to wrestle the saw off me? Holy, that could get really tasty really quick, right? Like, and then I had like a secondary thought to it, Sandra. I thought, who would be involved in that? I started to think of my friends, of my friendship circle, who would be the heroes of the group. And I sort of arrived at like the two guys in the room who I thought, if there was going to be any chance that they would like, try and get a hold of me, that it'd be those two dudes. And Jim, because he just had like the male, the testosterone going on. He had the beard like mine at 17, and he had fluff on his nuts, and he's like a man, so I thought maybe it'll be Jim. And I was like telling Brits, just because you have such a different connotation towards the name, where it holds no resonance at all in Canada, the other toughest guy in the room, or the guy who I thought might intervene or at least help Jim to try and take the saw off me were that to happen, was a guy named Byron, which I first realized when I would say Byron on stage to describe like a tough guy, would always, like, from certain regions and circles in the UK, would get a laugh, because of course, Lord Byron was always your sort of like stereotypical fairy, right? So, but in Canada, fucking Byron could really hang a licking on you, potentially. So there's always that like cultural disparity. So I'm out there in the field, and I just thought, maybe Jim or Byron. Then put the thought away. I did the test restart. I remember that. So I like turned the saw off, and then, pretended I was in the basement and gave it one pull, bang, right away, cracked right to life. So I was like, ooh, here we go. Woo! Turned the saw off, went back into the house. And I'll tell you, by this time, I thought for sure that they would have noticed me missing. Like, my perception of how much time had transpired and getting upstairs, getting out of the house silently, getting into the truck, getting out of the truck, running up the road, hiding under a tree, getting a saw warmed up, turning it off and on to test it, running back into the house. I thought by that time, Sandra, they're going to be forming search parties. I thought they're going to be like out there with lanterns. Craig, oh, Craig, where's our friend Craig? And of course, nobody at all had moved from the places that they were sitting in. And this is now, I find this out after I pad across the front room again, long hallway, across the kitchen, step down into, there's like a triple stair that goes to the back door before the longer stairs go into the deeper part of the basement, Sandra. And I always like, particularly when I'm performing in Ireland, and particularly in Northern Ireland, I draw a parallel with the type of behavior that Canadians have in their own home. And this is something that's like across the board, a very Canadian thing. If you visit your Canadian relatives, they will always have this. At the bottom of those triple stairs, coming from the kitchen to the back landing, as we might call it, where the back door buttresses where it comes in. We had probably from one of those washing machines or dryers, we had a big cardboard box, which again gives you some idea of like the size of Canadian houses, that we had space in our like back landing for like a box the size of a washer dryer set. And all that it was for is to have miscellaneous winter gear in it, Sandra. Miscellaneous, like if your friends from England come to visit, some of them might have a warm jacket, a scarf, a number of different, as we would call them, toques, hats, spare mittens, gloves, ski gloves, all different types of, depending on the temperature and the severity, we had random stuff. And because we had all that stuff at the last minute, Sandra, as a directorial decision made late, I had another, it was a day of brainstorms for me, you can imagine. I had the realization that, in that box was not just one, but a number of, 3 that I remember, balaclavas,
Oh.
My goodness. So I got to dig through all this stuff, and I had a chance on the landing to like try on 3 different balaclavas for the effect that I thought they might have. And I was like looking at our back window mirror that had like the keys on it. So I'm like sticking my head on this like reflective key to try out the different balaclavas. And I arrived, the one that I finally went with was a really like a cheaply made one. I remember it had, first of all, it had triangular eyes. I'll never ever forget that. And it had just a little oval mouth, but it didn't have a nose. So that in itself, I thought it was already spooky. So I put it on and I stuck my tongue out of the mouth hole as far as I could. And I looked at the mirror, and then I adjusted it, Sandra, so I only had one eye lined up. Because I thought it would just be that much weirder if holy fuck, he's only got one eye, right? Like I was playing ahead, just like at how much of a freak I could be. I went down the stairs, and again, I thought they weren't even going to be there. I thought they were going to be like out the back door looking for me. Where the hell can he have been for so long? None of them cared at all. I obviously had the most overinflated sense of my impact on my social group because none of them gave a shit. They didn't care that I'd told them I was going to piss when there was a more convenient bathroom. They were just sitting exactly where they were apparently quite riveted, quite engrossed in what I thought was a shit film, only maybe at top end 10 minutes earlier. And I blocked the only exit, the only entrance in, the only exit. And I started up that chainsaw, Sandra. Oh my God. Oh my good Lord. Have you ever in your life had the great pleasure and somewhat related terror of watching one of your best friends go from cross-legged on a floor to, not unlike the action of a mallard in a pond, to straight upright, like literally a jack in the box from cross-legged position, up to their feet, and then run straight into a concrete fucking wall.
Oh my God.
Like jumping to life, seeing the threat, and then just running in the first direction that their feet landed in and slamming like face first, like when you see on a blooper somebody running into a glass door, except this is a concrete wall because of the level of terror that has been elicited in their now shell of a reflexive, reactive animal that is no longer like a thinking, processing person. And now times like 12 or 14. You've just got like kids smashing off of each other like a barrel of monkeys. They finally sort of like, some were consoling each other in the middle of the room, but like literally just like if I can make a horrible image, like a Filipino disco fire type of exit, just like bodies entwined. People are like, just like absolutely like fused together. And at the same time, now something I didn't notice in the park is taking place, where because my dad had modified the muffler on the saw, it also didn't have like the same guts in it to prevent the massive belching of acrid, whitish, grayish smoke that was now filling the room. So it also had a theatrical angle to it, that it was like, now we're in a fog. So like they think this maniac in a balaclava with a chainsaw is like, coming out of a foggy bank. And it's just like, I mean, the level of madness that this is, Sandra, is like off the effing charts. And the 2 guys that I thought were going to try and disarm me, when I was in the park thinking maybe it'll be Byron, maybe it'll be Jim, those 2 guys that I thought might like try to be the heroes of the day were on my dad's easy chair, furthest away from me at the back wall. And they were on it, facing the wall, climbing each other, trying to get to a window that a cat couldn't get squeezed out of, right? Like that's the level of madness that they were dealing with in that moment. And I had to, in that atmosphere where there's like now there's like whimpering, crying teenagers. There's like console that it's gonna be okay. Like people are going into like hostage mode. And in that atmosphere, I took off a balaclava, turned off my chainsaw first, shut the saw off, pulled off my balaclava, and said, "Happy Halloween!"
Oh my God. Are they fuming with you?
God. Yeah, that was my Halloween show. Yeah.
Oh my God, I bet they were so mad at you. Do you know, Craig, I could speak to you for hours and hours and hours, but I actually have to go now because the studio is needed for somebody else. But could you just really briefly tell all my viewers about your gigs in December, please?
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm in Scotland from the 1st to the 15th of December. If you search at Moosefucker on probably anything, but my Instagram has the dates. You can also look at Breakneck Comedy out of Aberdeen, and I think they're probably at maybe Breakneck Comedy. You can search that, and those dates will be on there, and also the dates of other phenomenal comedians that if you had time out to see, I'm sure they'd appreciate it. And what a pleasure speaking to you. And I'll let you know that there's more to that story in terms of the fallout. You can imagine when you're a 17-year-old boy and you pulled a chainsaw on your friends, that it doesn't end there, of course. But we'll leave for another time, and I'll thank you so much again for taking time to speak to me. It's a real pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you for being the first person on my show. I would love to have you back. There's so much about you I want to know. You're amazing, Mr. Campbell. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'll say goodbye to your husband.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You keep him in line for me.
I will. See you, Sandra. Bye.
Bye.